Hey, before we get started with the show, I wanted to remind you that I'm going to be hosting what we refer to as the Post Rehab Summit coming in Scottsdale. That's going to be coming up in April, not February. It's going to be coming up in April 12th and 13th. Okay. Basically, look, what we're going to be talking about is post rehab. Now, our jobs would be much easier if everybody came in perfect condition. Unfortunately, most people have lingering orthopedic issues, aches and pains, muscular imbalances, postural issues. Now, I help a lot of my clients through exercise deal with these issues, whether it's chronic or continuing functional deficit that they've had after completing physical therapy or been released by a physician. Well, it's my job to help them get back to exercising with little or no pain. Someone's going to help you do the same with your clients. All right, we're going to be touching on a lot of things over 2 days: low back pain of all shapes and sizes, knee problems, patellofemoral syndrome, ACL repair, meniscal tear, total knee replacement, hip replacement, impingement syndrome in the shoulder, rotator cuff, tennis and golfer's elbow, all sorts of things. We're going to cover it all. All right, for each condition, you're going to learn specific pathology, simple assessment techniques, contraindications, and safe and effective exercises, including progressions to help you keep your client moving forward. All right. So if you're interested, check out the show notes, or you can go to the website. The official website is thefirmbodypilates.com/post-rehab-summit. Okay. thefirmbodypilates.com/post-rehab-summit. And I hope to see you there. Now, on to the show. Welcome to Moving Conversations, a podcast for movement professionals by movement professionals. If you coach, train, or teach movement, Pilates, or fitness, then this podcast is for you. With more than 60 years of experience in fitness and Pilates, your hosts, Brian Ritchie and Nora St. John, explore the science of human movement, diving deep into the facts, myths, and common misconceptions, hoping to spark thought and conversation about how we view fitness and movement. Now, let's jump into Moving Conversations. Welcome back to Movie Conversations. I'm Brian Ritchie. Joining me as always is Nora St. John. Good morning, Nora. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well over here in California, Brian. And I know for those of you who are listening, Brian just returned from a long trip to China.
Long trip.
He had a great time and had a wonderful time teaching anatomy and other things to some of our Chinese students. And it was super exciting. And now we're getting back on track with the back.
Yep, we're getting back to the low back. And we've been teasing this for a few weeks now. We have been teasing it, but we're going to get on to exercise progressions today. But before we do that, a couple of things. Number one, I wanted to remind people that I'm going to be in Scottsdale, Arizona, hosting my post-rehab summit. It's going to be over President's Day weekend. Check out the show notes if you want more information on that. I'll put it in there. I'll put a link to the website. And do us a favor, as always, hit the like and subscribe button. And as always, please comment. Every comment really helps us in our algorithms. We really appreciate it. And every, thumbs up and 5-star rating really helps us with whatever platform you happen to listen on. And also check us out on Instagram at Moving Convos, as well as Moving Conversations on Facebook and movingconvos@gmail.com. You can always get in touch with us. So if you have any ideas or questions, comments, etc., please hit us up. All right. Now that that's behind us, let's get on with talking more about exercise progressions with the low back.
One of the things that I found a lot when working with clients with low back pain was that, and also with Pilates instructors working with clients with low back pain, is that they would get very intent on the basics, which we've talked about a lot. Where is the lumbopelvic position, finding stability, beginning mobility, but then they wouldn't progress the client much beyond that, kind of like, supine, knee straight, and toe taps and things like that. And one of the things that I think is important and that I've really seen a bit of a gap in is taking those clients then up to standing, up to actually lifting and moving and really getting them a little more functional.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we wanted to focus on today, is how do you take that client from dynamic lumbopelvic control and some simple mobility exercises and awareness to a more complete workout program that really helps to prepare them hopefully for life.
And I think you said it best with one word that you said is function.
Hmm.
You want to be
Yep.
functional because how many times have you gotten a client and they're lying on the mat table or the Cadillac and you have them doing their exercises and they can access their core? Everything's working great.
Yep. They
Then you
look
change
good.
position and all hell breaks loose. Suddenly they're like, it's as though you didn't do anything or teach them anything about their core. They get onto all fours and you want me to do what? Huh? Huh?
Hmm.
And their core is like, I'm taking a nap now. I'm done.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
you get them to seated, you get them to standing, you challenge them in other positions, and everything's turned off, but on their back, totally fine. But very few
Yeah.
professions can you really do on your back. Well, there's one I'm thinking of, but other than that, there's not a whole lot you can do lying on your back,
No.
you know?
So one of the things that the classic time that really woke my mind up about that was when I got the Coraline in my studio, which is a particular piece of
Mm,
equipment where you're standing. There's kind of a ladder in front of you, and then there's a sort of two dynamic independent carts under your feet. That's a quick explanation.
yep.
And so I'd have clients go from the Pilates environment, which is a lot of it is, supine, prone, seated, side lying. There's not a huge amount of standing work to standing. And I had clients who I'd had for 8 years, for 10 years. They looked great in all the Pilates stuff. They really had managed that environment well and were doing a really good job. And I took them to standing, and it was like every pattern that I remembered from the very first time I worked with them in terms of poor posture and other things were back.
Yep.
Now, the good news was I could correct it very quickly because of the work we'd already done. But clearly what they had been doing for all that time was not translating to the
Mhm.
most important thing they need to do, which is standing up and moving.
Yep.
And that was really honestly slightly horrifying. I was like, what have I been doing for the last 8 years? But it reminded me of a truth of any kind of physical training, which is that what you train is what you train. You
Mhm.
train lying down, you get good at lying down. You train standing up in parallel, you get good at standing up in parallel. What we train does not necessarily translate to other positions or other situations. To some extent, it does, but not as much as we would hope.
Yeah. And that is the key is you have to get them into other positions. You
Yep.
have to. If if all you're doing is putting them in one position, or if all you do is bench press and that's the only exercise you do, guess what? You're going to get good at bench press.
Yep.
That doesn't mean you're going to be good at squats. That doesn't mean you're going to be good at any other exercise except for, ones that are very, very similar to the bench press.
It also doesn't
And
even
it's
mean, to be even more specific, that you're not even necessarily going to be really good at standing up and, let's say, pushing a
no,
lawnmower,
not at
which
all.
you'd think would be like a bench press. But just because you changed from supine, where your back is supported and you're pushing something while
Yep.
your back is supported, you take that to standing where your back isn't supported, and the same, it doesn't necessarily translate even to something that obviously related.
Well, I think I've told you this story. I've mentioned it in a bunch of my classes. There was a study where they took twin boxers,
Mm,
and they trained them separately. They trained one on a cable crossover machine. So they had to stand up. So they were doing all of
yeah.
their chest work, pressing using cables. That's all they did was use cables. The other one got onto the bench press and was pushing a lot of weight that way. Well, the person in the bench press could lift a lot more weight because
Yeah.
pure weight, whereas his brother using the cables pushed much less weight. However, when they measured the amount of force that a single punch provided, the one who was doing the cables was almost twice that of the one who did the bench
Mm.
press. Because what they were finding is the one who did the bench press would hit the other person and then literally push themselves away. Their body
Oh,
couldn't
wow.
maintain the strength to push through, that their body took a bunch of the brunt of the
Yeah.
force and pushed away from the force. Whereas the person who was used to holding their body in place in a standing position while pressing, he knew how to control his body and could deliver that force, bringing it from his feet through the ground all the way up through his body and transferring that force from his legs into his arm. And it was a huge difference in power.
That is a beautiful study. So that certainly speaks to or reinforces our
Yeah.
belief system. So just to be clear on that, which is that when you train somebody to use the body in an integrated fashion, you get better results than when you do isolated movements. I mean,
Mhm.
clearly isolated movements are good for certain things, and sometimes you
Sure.
need strength in an isolated area. But that's exactly the point, right? That in a standing position with a cable cross machine, you're using your legs, you're using your feet, using your hips, using your torso, and you're moving that force through the whole body to
Mhm.
be delivered by that arm, which is very, very different than something where your back is completely stabilized by the bench, right? Your feet are there and you're just pushing with the arms.
Yep.
And that's really where we want to take clients with low back pain, is to get them into more upright, functional, moving positions where they can use the whole body.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that I forgive me if I'm jumping to a conclusion here, but I'm going to say it in fitness terms.
Yeah.
Most of fitness was developed for bodybuilders,
Yeah.
for physique athletes, or for strength athletes doing a specific lift, Olympic style lifting,
Right.
powerlifting.
Yep.
That's what it was designed for. Either vanity, where you're isolating all the muscles, or a specific one, lift, for instance,
Yep.
or
Yep.
the big three: squats, deads, and presses. So it was really specifically for that. It wasn't until recently that anybody thought of integrated movement and getting people to actually move their body through space, unless you were training for a specific sport, but then it was sport specific.
Right.
And even in Pilates, if all you're doing is the reformer and you're limited to, you know, the choreography that was traditionally taught, a lot of it's done lying down. There is some
And
standing,
bilaterally
there is some kneeling.
symmetrically.
And
And,
yes,
and it's bilaterally symmetrical for the most part. It doesn't work on
yeah,
independence, and it doesn't have a lot of rotation, just to, address two of the limitations there.
exactly. Unless you put it into your choreography, you have to
Right.
create that.
Yep.
And that's something that you and I both do when we're teaching our courses, is really trying to create and get people to think outside of the traditional
In either discipline.
in either discipline, in all
Right.
disciplines.
Yep.
In all disciplines, you don't have to just do, these 10 exercises. You can do a ton of different exercises. And it's all about integrating movement and trying to get people to think beyond the box, think beyond what they're used to. So when they come to me from a physical therapist and here's one page of exercises, and I've been doing this for the last 2 weeks, or I'm supposed to have been doing this for the last few months.
More
And I
likely.
started again yesterday, knowing I was coming to see you. And it's like, okay, but what now? What about the progression? I find a lot of PTs don't have enough time necessarily to add in all
No.
those progressions
No,
and to really
no.
go
They've got
beyond it.
4 or 6 or 7 sessions, right? And it's like that's not enough to get somebody beyond the basics mostly. I mean, we know that
No.
too from our world. Yeah.
And they're going to have functional deficits. Everybody does when they leave physical therapy, because physical therapy is not there to take people all the way to a touchdown. You get to the 10-yard line and you hope that they get the rest of on their own by
Yep.
continuing to do the exercises. But without
Mhm.
the progression, do they really make a whole lot of progress?
Some do,
Questionable.
some don't,
Exactly.
right? A lot don't. A lot get stuck somewhere. And it may be that they make some progress and then they get stuck at some plateau. They can't lean over, they can't rotate, they can't,
Yep.
something.
And I think, and forgive me if, again, this is me jumping to a different conclusion, a lot of physical therapists are people who like to exercise, are people who are exercisers, either in a sport, or they are gym rat, or they're Pilates or whatever. They really enjoy the exercise aspect. So I think we have to remind ourselves sometimes that not everybody's like us. So when they leave physical therapy, the client might be like, I'm done. Hooray, I'm
Yeah,
finished. I never
exactly.
have to exercise again.
Yep.
Whereas I think sometimes the personal trainer, Pilates instructor, or physical therapist assumes, well, this person's going to start going to the gym on their own. They're going to start exercising on their own, and they're going to get stronger naturally, without realizing that, yeah, probably not. The average person probably not going to do that.
No. So this is again, and this is often our role, right? I think of many of the clients I've had are kind of post-rehab clients, if you want to talk about it that way. You know,
Yep.
they've been through physical therapy or they've had surgery, they've gone through whatever is prescribed for them or whatever they can afford, depending on the situation. And then they come to me because the job wasn't really done. So
Yep.
where do we take them from there? In terms of the low back particularly, there's a few things that I always work on. So there are a few things that I'm going to focus on here. So one of them is starting to do things like what kinds of spinal movements can they do and which ones can they not do, or have they stopped doing out of fear?
Sure.
Because very often that's not addressed in terms of a physical therapy program. Typically they're pretty sagittal, they're pretty bilateral. They're not always a lot of rotation or other kinds of things going, or even lateral flexion. They're usually stuck pretty much in that plane.
Yep.
And, if you just think about driving your car, now it's less true these days with full self-driving and lots of screens that tell you what to do. So you never actually have to turn around. But in the old days, you had to turn around and see if there was something behind you or look in your mirrors. And so just, ordinary things like those rotations that we have to do in ordinary life can really cause trouble for somebody with back pain who hasn't been trained to do that in an integrated way. Yeah. So, rotation is something I focus on a lot, and we'll go into more detail there. The other thing too is just endurance, because a lot of times back issues create a lot of weakness. They may have come from weakness, but they also usually irritation and inflammation will weaken the musculature around that area of inflammation. And we really have to work on just getting them stronger so that they can actually support their back for a longer period of time. So endurance, rotation, mobility in different directions. What are things too, Brian, are there other key things that you want to focus on in terms of progressions?
Well, those are huge for me. Endurance is big. Endurance, we often refer to as tissue tolerance. Your tissues can only tolerate a certain amount of stress before they say, I'm done. And we see that because if they're doing something like cooking, for instance, they're cooking on a Sunday or baking and they're in the kitchen for a long period of time. Well, after an hour, their back starts to get to them. And if I do my job right and get them stronger, well, it shouldn't be an hour. Maybe it lasts 2 hours. Maybe it's 3 hours. Maybe it's the whole day. Maybe after a day of cooking, then it starts hurting them. I know I've done my job if I can push that number further and further and further, because they're creating greater endurance. The other thing I want to reinforce is proper movement patterns. Teaching people how to move properly. We all assume that someone should be able to rotate properly, but if they don't know how to, if they're not taught that you actually turn your shoulders and not your low back, or they're not taught that, oh, you're supposed to turn through your hips. Oh, I didn't know that. If they don't realize that, then all the good work that they've done in physical therapy could be undone by swinging a golf club incorrectly, or by opening a heavy door incorrectly, by twisting wrong, because
picking up a squirming 2-year-old, right?
Yeah, something. And so you want to teach those proper movement patterns. And again, that's not something that I say, we're going to work now on proper movement patterns. Nah. It comes about as we're doing exercise, like, okay, I want to do a little bit of rotation here. We want to work on this. So I'll see where their limitation is. And I'll say, okay, let's try this. Let's try this. And by slowly getting them to think about, oh, I'm turning through my shoulders more. Even if it's just some of the rotation stuff that you and I have talked about, just swaying, in rotation and letting your arms swing, something as simple as that. It begins to create a different pattern in their head. And they're like, oh, well, yeah, that's free. I can move that. That doesn't hurt me. Okay, let's add that when we walk. Let's add that when we, small increments. So again, I'm into micro progressions. I like to make small progressions rather than huge jumps. So that's just something else to think about.
Right. And so I'm thinking of the Pilates environment specifically for this next comments. And one of the things there is, for example, if I'm working with somebody with low back pain that is reactive, like it doesn't like new things much, I'll add one exercise at a time, literally one exercise let's say I'm seeing somebody twice a week. I'll add one exercise. That's all I'm going to add to the program. I'll see how they do that day. I'll see how they do the next time I see them, that second time that week. If they were okay, or maybe, maybe I can modify, maybe need to modify a little bit, I'll do that again. Then if that works, we might do that for a couple of weeks. Then we're going to add another exercise. So again, slow progressions generally, especially with a reactive low back, which a lot of low backs are reactive. The other thing that I'm going to go back to two things. I'm going to go back to rotation for a moment. One problem that I see a lot in the Pilates repertoire, even the more contemporary repertoire, is that rotation is often done with the pelvis stable and the rotation's happening from the torso alone. With somebody with low back pain, that is not often ideal.
Yeah.
Because it will put stress into the low back, into the sacroiliac joints, into that whole thoracolumbar fascia down the back. And I'm just working with a client the other day where, again, because of her strong Pilates background, she's an instructor. She was really trained to kind of rotate without adding the pelvis in. And every time she did that, she got some like low back achiness, a little bit of SI joint irritation and inflammation. And so it's like, okay, so you are not going to rotate from the torso alone. Like, we're not going to do those exercises. If you're rotating, I want you to include the pelvis in that rotation. And we really worked on training the rotation, initiating from the pelvis. And in her case, it was almost like the pelvis rotates and the rib cage and the pelvis stay oriented with each other. Like, you're not even really rotating the rib cage much more than the pelvis. And this brought me back to another thing I work on a lot with low back is, how stable do I need to keep that low back in functional exercises or in mobility? So another little example from the Pilates repertoire is short spine massage. That's flexion. Now, oftentimes with somebody with a disc issue, I'm not going to do that. I may never do it again. But if they get to the point where that's an appropriate thing to do, a lot of times what I'll say is, okay, so roll down through the thorax. This is something where your legs are up in the air, your feet are in the straps, and you're rolling through the back in a flexed position for sure. So go through the thorax, and then maybe you kind of lower the whole low back in a clump. So you're not going to rotate, or you're not going to flex through the lumbar. You're going to kind of go thorax, and then lumbar comes down in a one chunk. So sometimes it's also working on where is the movement coming from and respecting the limitations you may have. You're still moving, but you're keeping that area out of the movement, at least for now. Right. So that's kind of one way to progress, is you're moving towards exercises that may be challenging for them, but you're really limiting how much that lumbar is participating in those exercises.
Yeah. Something that when I was in China, I had two different groups that I was teaching, and I was teaching about the low back. We did 2 days on low back work. And something that I noticed about them, and I've noticed this about a lot of Pilates instructors in general, is the amount of over-controlled, focus. And things are done very slow and very controlled. And they want to control the environment of their body. And I understand the reasoning for some of it. But when it comes to the low back, I kept having to get them out of moving so slowly and controlling the amount of torso rotation. It's like, just move your body, just allow motion. And you could see once they started moving, they're like, oh, and I said, you can do it gently. You don't have to, do it in, spasmodic, crazy ranges of motion, and jerkiness, but just allow, what I call the speed of life, move at a normal pace, not rushing. But if you're just moving, just move, allow the natural rhythm of the body to create some motion and to create a normal rhythm, and to not go too fast and not go overly slow at the same time. Because like you say, a lot of people will just turn the torso. They're so controlled and they want to turn just the shoulders. It's like, look, through life, that's not what we do. Throw a ball and try and do that. Try and do that so slowly and slow controlled. I'm not going to make it 6 inches. It's going to fall. You need to be able to actually use your body. And it was interesting watching all of these instructors loosen up and relax and suddenly start to move, and their movement patterns all improved. You
Mhm.
could see everybody begin to improve, and you could see lights turn on and go, oh. And people say, yeah, we're taught like this. And they say, that's fine at the beginning, maybe. But you have to allow people to move.
That's the awareness piece, right? You work slow, you work consciously, you recognize the movement pattern, you
Mhm.
identify what's happening. That is a very important first step often,
Absolutely.
but it is the first step. And it's not,
Got to get
it's
past it.
not just in China, right? That I see that all the time. And it's like, we talk about motor control as having 4 phases, basically. And there's a lot of ways to talk about it. But, one is unconsciously incompetent,
Mhm.
right? You're not moving well, and you don't know you're not moving well.
You don't know where your
Then you've
body
kind
is.
of
It's
got,
whatever it
right,
is.
right. Then you've got consciously incompetent. You still aren't moving well, but at least you're aware of it.
You
Then
know
you
you're not
right,
doing it.
right. You're not doing it right, but at least you know that. And then you've got consciously competent. You're paying attention, you're aware of it, but the goal is not conscious competence. And this is really important.
Mhm.
Pilates teachers out there. Your goal is unconsciously competent.
Yeah.
Your goal is to take that consciousness and that awareness and to move it into habit,
Yeah.
to move it past the conscious phase so that it's there for you when, you slide on the ice, or somebody throws something at you, or your dog runs under your feet, or your child jumps up into your arms. Like that is, unconscious competence is what we're aiming for, that those motor patterns are so deeply ingrained that you can react and respond to all kinds of situations that are not expected.
Yep.
Right. So I think that's off again, that step. And Pilates teachers are certainly, this is an issue for Pilates teachers. We love that consciously competent phase, is moving into that unconscious competence. And a lot of times that is letting people move. And one of the things when you were saying that is I thought, what is the rhythm of life? And a lot of times if I'm thinking about integration, I think about walking,
Mhm.
just the rhythm of walking, right? That rhythm of that slight rotation through the hips, that slight rotation through the torso, that little shift of weight. That is a very natural rhythm where the whole body has to integrate to do it well.
Mhm.
And that's a good pacing. I think if you're thinking about not too fast, not too slow, what would the pace be if you were walking?
Yeah. First time I learned this, I was working with a 96-year-old woman and getting her to stand up out of a chair. It
Mm-hmm.
took a minute. She went so dang slow, and it was so frustrating to watch because standing up and sitting down a set of 10 shouldn't take 10 minutes. And what I told her one day, I was so frustrated. I said, I want you to jump out of that seat. And she looked at me with wide eyes. What? And I said, I want you to get up out of that chair as fast as possible. I'm here. I'm not going to let anything happen to you. You're safe. I'm right here, but come up as quickly as possible. And she stood up normally. She just went, stand up. In her mind, she jumped,
Yeah.
but she moved at a normal pace. And it dawned on me,
Yeah.
we seem to lose that when we have fear of pain, when we
Absolutely.
have fear of falling, whenever there's
Yep.
fear involved, we have a tendency to close our world and our environment down. We get smaller and smaller and smaller. And again, this is a 96-year-old woman who had fallen down a huge flight of stairs. She had some
Okay.
fear.
Yeah.
There's understandable fear there. And once we moved past that, it opened up her world. It was, wow, she was moving at a regular pace, and it was wonderful to watch. But that sort of was one of those keys that I thought, wow. And I noticed that with some clients, they start pushing, and like on the reformer or something, they're pushing and they're going slow, and you can see they're enjoying the slowness. I'm like, great, that's awesome. Let's move. And I would just say speed of life, and they'll say, oh, I'm with you. And then they start getting into a normal rhythm. And you can find when they're like walking is a perfect example. They get that natural rhythm going. It's like, yeah, you can feel it and see it, and it looks comfortable. If they go too fast, it looks uncomfortable. If they go too slow, it looks too hard. Like just standing up is so difficult. But if they're just at that natural, easy rhythm, it should look effortless and easy.
So thinking about specific exercises, for me, some of it is things like sitting down and getting up, right?
Yep.
Called stand to sit or sit to stand. Just working with sitting down and getting up and sitting down and getting up and sitting down and getting up. And how do you do that comfortably? How do you do that? Again, starting slowly, starting carefully, figuring out what you need to do that, and then being able to do it at a normal pace. Walking, and letting people actually start to move. I remember too, a lot of my clients with low back pain, like they have stabilized themselves from kind of like the bottom of their knees. And they're like a little tiny pace, they got a little tiny range of motion that they're using, and they're totally braced in the middle section. Again, out of fear and out of pain control, which may be appropriate for a period of time. But once that period of time is over, you want to start to see, okay, can you actually start to let that energy move a little bit more through that area? Another place I've worked on that is in pinwheel, right? Pinwheel, our sideline exercise, arm comes forward, circles up around, it's actually Feldenkrais exercise. And with clients with low back pain, often there is no rotation anywhere. The hips don't move, the torso doesn't move, the arm does the whole circle. And just trying to get them to actually let the body respond in a safe, small range area is a really nice way to start getting that process going of integrating the rest of the body in and getting past that fear barrier of, if I move my back, it hurts.
I find whatever position they feel most comfortable in from lying down, if I'm going to progress them from their supine exercises, for instance, I like doing quadruped next if they can do it and if they feel comfortable. Some people really don't feel comfortable on all fours because they're never there. So that might be a little too foreign for them. Whereas sitting or standing is the next most comfortable position for them. So sometimes I will have them do like telescope arms, like book openers, and do it against the wall.
Yeah.
And do it against the wall. So what I found is by doing it against the wall, they have a little bit more rotation in their shoulders and they can find a nice, easy rhythm, hold the position, come back. And again, it's done sideways. One shoulder is against the wall. Both arms are out in front of you. And you're going to bring it, you're going to take your top arm, you're going to trace it along your body and then reach back, behind you, but reach forward with the arm on the wall at the same time. And I find that that's a great way to progress them into getting a little bit more rotation in a standing position where they're comfortable. I'm not going to sit on their, hips moving because if they move a little bit, cool. I have no problem with that. Go for it because that's normal.
Yeah, I often have to, especially again with many Pilates clients, I have to cue them to let the hips move on any of those exercises because, oftentimes they're trained to just move the torso. And it's like, no, see if, when do the hips need to move? Like that's the other thing is exploring with them and helping them understand when does that movement happen? Like, when am I blocking it? Like I'm fine here. And then suddenly, like if I don't let the hips move, I can't go very far.
Stuck.
So then, when is that moment? And then trying to integrate that into that whole movement.
Yeah. So that's sort of my thing is I want to make sure I can get them into a position that they're going to feel comfortable in because taking them to quadruped is my next instinct. And if that's not a position they feel comfortable in, I'm going to see them be very resistant to it. However, if they are comfortable in there, to add something to that is a simple elbow drop where they're on all fours and they take one arm off the ground and then bend it and try and put the forearm on the ground. It's an initial type of rotation. It begins people into thinking about moving, into that rotation. And the same thing, I will have them, go forward and back, just rocking side to side, tail wag, lateral flexion. Just begin to explore what feels comfortable, what may not feel comfortable. And if they're not comfortable with it, okay, are they stuck anywhere? What's making them stuck? Is it their position, etc.? So I could do a little bit more thorough examination at that time. But I find a lot of times when they've progressed to that point, they can move fairly well. They may be a little restricted, but their movement patterns are going to be a whole lot more than when they first started with me.
Right. So all fours is a beautiful place to work on beginning spinal mobility in every in every direction.
Yeah.
For two reasons. One, it's generally safe. I've had a million clients who can't do a seated lateral flexion because it's kind of too much torso weight and it really causes irritation. But you get them on all fours and they can do like a tail wag, which is still
Yep.
lateral flexion, but your closed chain, top of the body, closed chain, bottom of the body. And in all fours, clients are mostly only going to go as far as they're comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's just, it really limits how far they can go, and they're not going to generally choose to go into pain. So it's a great place to start. But again, that's not really functional. We don't spend a lot of time on all
Nope.
fours. So like the next step for me a lot of times is seated or standing arm work.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking of, works in the personal training environment or in the Pilates environment. For example, if you have a tower or you have a trap table, doing standing arm work. I do a lot of this with my low back clients, starting with bilateral, just like chest presses, but they're standing and they're having to feel that like slight lean into the straps, adding just a chest press. And then we go into maybe some single arm, and then maybe we go into some rotation. Maybe we do that with different leg movements. So I do a lot of different standing exercises there, both facing away from the tower or the wall unit or the cable cross machine and facing towards it as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there it's like integrating again, the upper and the lower body again, first sagittally, bilaterally, nice and clean and clear, just finding that stability, then starting to add single arm, then starting to add some rotation into that.
Yep.
And I find that is a really nice way to get the body integrated in a relatively safe way. Again, they're getting a lot of core engagement without core movement, which is something I'm also looking for. You're also creating endurance for being upright.
Yes.
Which is kind of what we're ultimately aiming for.
And also you're
really
teaching how to stabilize the spine from the ground up, which we have to do on a regular basis anyway. You need to be able to hold your torso. If I was going to press something or pull something, I shouldn't have my body be all over the place. I should be able to stay within a comfortable position, comfortable standing position, control my body, and to be able to push or pull. I use a lot of band work. I do a lot of tube work. But I also have a machine called the core sticks, which are fiberglass resistance rods that mount into something that's either on a board or on, attached to the floor. And it's basically faceted so that there's a bunch of holes in a bunch of different directions. So I can put a very light resistance rod in both sides and have them pull. And they have to hold their body stable as they're pulling so they don't rock back and forth. And I can make it harder. I can make it easier. You can go all the way up to like 75 pounds and all the way down to 3 pounds. So, you have different resistances. And I can do that for presses. I can then change it to unilateral when they're ready for that. I can keep it to bilateral. I can do a push and a pull. There's so many variations that you can do in that position that I'll also sometimes like to do on the reformer. I'll do a push and pull where I'm pulling with the strap with one hand, but I'll put a tube behind me where I'm pressing with that. So I can do a pushing and a pull. So there's, I'm creating resistance from two different directions. There's so many variables that you can add to this in a standing or a seated position that it really opens your world up to all these different progressions.
Which again, so just to, I think we're pretty clear on that, but just to be clear on that. So I start bilaterally symmetrically.
Yeah.
Right. Both arms, same thing, whatever the resistance is appropriate for them. Right. And just keeping them stable. Then you start to work into maybe one side, just like one arm at a time, one arm pushing, one arm pulling, whatever, then starting to add rotation. And then maybe, for me, the last step would be one arm pulling, one arm pushing against resistance, because that's going to give the most force through the body. So that, again, that general progression is a nice way to build endurance. And it's a way to develop functional dynamic core strength.
Yeah.
And again, for a low back issue, what I love about all those standing exercises and seated, you can do some of that seated too, but is that it's training the body in a neutral low back position. Because typically all that's done from a neutral low back, you're training it to take those forces in a bunch of different ways through the body and pull that force from the arms, say through the core, through the torso, through the pelvis, out the other leg, right? So you're really getting that full integration of the body.
Yeah. And it's important to remember that we're taking this in stages. So So the supine work is important.
Yes,
Quadruped work, that's all important.
absolutely.
But to take them to that next level is so important to be able to graduate to regular exercises. Now, there are times when someone will have generalized low back pain and they're not in an acute situation where they're tired of doing all of the seated, the lying down stuff, and they just want to exercise. I just want to work out.
Yeah,
So you
yeah,
know
yeah.
what? I could put them in a seated position and have them do a cable row
Yep.
or have them do a press or even a lateral raise that if I'm lifting weights up to my side, guess what? My torso has to respond to that. My spine has to respond.
Exactly.
And I can keep it bilateral, or I can eventually move them to unilateral, or I can change the plane of motion from one plane, from sagittal to frontal, or a mixture of both, or throw in different things. And what I love to do is I use the clock all the time. I'll say, okay, we're going to take the dumbbells. Where I say 12 o'clock, take it to the front. When I say 3 o'clock, it's out to the side. And will I go to 4? No, my arms don't do that. But I can still do noon to 3 or from noon to 6. And or noon to 9 o'clock. And that's a great way just to throw some variety in there, get their brain, active at the same time, but hit different planes of motion. Because each time I do that, my spine has to adjust just a little bit. And I find that those progressions, their mind isn't on their spine or on their low back pain. It's on, what am I saying? I'm sort of distracting them.
Mm-hmm.
And that
Yep.
distraction can actually help get their mind off of their back.
Exactly.
So they're not even thinking about that.
Yep.
And and at the end of 4 or 5 sessions, their back is a lot stronger, but they haven't even thought about, we're doing low back training.
Exactly.
Do something else.
It's sneaky.
Sneaky.
In a way,
sneaky bug.
and sometimes you do. Like low back pain can be so fear-inducing that you often have to find ways to give them exercises and not have them focus on their back, right? Oh, we're going to do this exercise for your arms, right? Or for your legs or for something else. And you're getting a lot of core work in there too, but they're not focusing there. So like, let's really feel those shoulders and where they are going, or feel, how those legs are working or whatever the cues are. So cue them away from the area that's uncomfortable for them.
And anytime and if you're in a standing position, think of it that way.
Yeah.
Anytime you load the body from a standing position, your core has to be engaged in one way, shape, or form. If I'm doing a tricep press down, guess what? If my torso is not engaged, if my core is not engaged, I'm going to collapse.
Exactly.
So I have to be engaged. If I do a curl, if I do a row, if I do anything, whether it be, again, with a band, cables, a spring, however you want to load the body. But if you're doing it in an upright position, your core has to respond to that resistance. And you can trick them by saying, oh, we're going to work your arms. We're working your chest now. We're working your shoulders. Oh, okay. We're not focused on that anymore. I'm exercising. I'm working out now. So yeah, you are, but yeah, we're going to kill 2 birds with 1 stone now.
And in the reformer, again, just to be in the Pilates environment for a moment, right? We've got actually Pilates environment generally, you've got some options. All the arm work. You can do it seated. You can do it seated on the box. You can do it kneeling, low kneeling. You can do high kneeling. High kneeling means you also have that ability to move the pelvis, which I really, really like to focus on once they're ready for that. And if their low back can tolerate like being up in high kneeling, sometimes that puts the back in too much extension, especially if they're tight in the front of their hips. So kind of play with that. And one other thing that I want to mention, because I've seen this a lot, is it's easy to get very focused on, let's say, the front of the body, right? So thinking about the abdominals, especially Pilates is biased that way anyway. But one of the things I found also with a lot of low back clients is they haven't been given enough back strengthening for the whole back chain, hamstrings, glutes, and all the way up through the erector spinae. And oftentimes, many low back clients of any kind can't really tolerate actual extension past neutral. So I love exercises where they have to stay prone, but they have to support their body. And that's where Pilates is really a nice environment for that. Chair work, right? All the chair arm work, lying prone on the seat, hands on the pedal.
Yeah.
I don't really care what their arms are doing. I'm doing it to maintain the stability of their back for an extended period of time, creating endurance through the whole back body. That's why I'm doing that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really nice way to do it. Or on the long box, on the reformer, right? Doing all the arm work there. Again, I don't really care what the arms are doing, although that's a useful way to get some core work going. But I'm going for endurance for that whole back line in a neutral position. And in both those, I may not go up into extension, but I'm just having them hold that position. Or in personal training land, to have them, like, let's say, prone on the physio ball.
Bingo.
And having to stabilize in just a plank position with the ball under their hips, or moving down farther down the legs for more challenge. All those situations are another way to, again, get that just basic endurance of how do I hold my back together.
I love using the physio ball or fit ball, whatever you want to call it, gym ball.
Yeah.
And I'll usually start it under their stomach first.
Yep.
Just to take a little bit of pressure off their low back. But what I'll do, because remember, we're not talking about just training only the small portion of the low back. We're not talking about,
we're talking the whole chain.
We want
for me, I'm talking the whole chain. Yeah.
Whole chain. So I'll have them do W's and T's.
Yep.
Because that's changing. Yeah, that's changing what they're doing in that position. And as soon as my arms come off the ground and out to my side, well, guess what? I'm holding up more weight.
Yeah.
And you go into a W, it changes. I'll go W, reach out into a T, back to a W. I will have them eventually go into a Y, where their arms are in front of them, because, hey, that's a huge challenge.
Yeah, big lever.
But I will not let them go into extension. I'll have them only lift the arms and back down. So now I've got an isometric contraction of their entire spine as they're lifting their arms up. They don't have to go into extension. I can even keep them in slight flexion if I want. I can put them in a slight posterior tilt, but that entire chain is firing, and I'm beginning to build strength. And it's another way to sneak it in there, in that I'm going to say, we're going to work your shoulders. Your shoulders are bothering you just a little bit. We're going to do some rotator cuff preventative stuff. I'll make something up, but I'm still focusing on their lumbar spine, but their entire spine, getting the whole chain to fire. And it works great. Yep,
absolutely. And two little things about that. One is, I liked what you said, and I just wanted to put a little line under this. Many clients are not comfortable prone with a low back issue. Again, even if they can tolerate extension in theory, sometimes it's just compressive, just because of it is.
Yes.
So, that idea of being prone and being in a slight posterior tilt, and I'll cue that lots of ways. Sometimes I'll put a little pillow under the belly or under the front of the hips just to keep that going. But I'll also just have them lift their abdominals up, or gently push their pubic bone into the mat, or gently use their glutes to kind of press their pubic bone down to go into a slight posterior tilt. And that will often decrease that compression feeling in the low back. So if they're just at that point where they can start to tolerate prone, but they need those cues, use them. I've got a lot of clients, and I can think of a lot, who have just, they're a little tight in the front of their hips, they're a little lordotic, and they really, every time they're prone, they get that compression unless they gently, slightly posteriorly tilt and open up the low back. If that works for them, then they're going to do all of their prone work with that slight posterior tilt, right? Just like a little abdominal lift, or tuck the tail under, whatever cue is going to work for that client. And then they do everything from there. So that's just another thing to just bring up, again, with low back pain. That's a very, very common, even with your clients without low back pain, they just don't like extension. Or they don't like being prone, even in a mat class or whatever. And that's an easy way to often get them comfortable there.
And I found with a number of clients who have learned in the past, before they started working with me, how to do back extensions, either lying down, a variation of like swimmer, where, they're going to lift we call it Superman, where you lift your upper and your lower body at the same time, without realizing that if you're not cueing that properly, you are just basically asking your spine to compress your discs, because you're just, and you watch people, they just jerk up. And it's like, no, we want to lengthen.
Bang. Exactly. You want to lengthen, you want to get the elongation, the decompression first, then going up into extension. And that takes some time, I find. To get to train that decompression takes takes time. I find that takes a lot
Absolutely.
of time.
And I find before I'll take them on the floor, because on the floor, what I find is they're already sort of in the finished position. They're already in
Mm.
somewhat of an extension position.
Yeah.
Whereas on the ball, I can begin them in a flexion position where they're
Uh-huh.
flexed a little bit. And then if I want to add motion, I can take them from flex to neutral.
Right.
And
Yes.
without adding the extra portion of
Yes.
extension, and
Mm-hmm.
begin to train that way, and then investigate how far can they come up under control? Can they keep
Yep.
that slight posterior tilt and elongate? Or do they immediately dump into their low back? In which case, you're not ready for it yet. I don't say that to them, but I say, I'm gonna keep you down just a little bit, and we're gonna focus on this instead. Focus their mind on the positive, what they're doing well, rather than the negative. But yeah, and then again, begin to investigate what can they do. Take them small, micro progression, an inch at a time, until they can go into more extension and they're getting more thoracic extension and really lengthening the body. And you can see the difference when done properly. You can really see the difference.
In the Pilates environment, both, so the chair or the ladder barrel are two places where I play with this. So on the chair, if I'm really starting somebody to be very gently going into extension, and I know the lumbar is sensitive, they may be like on the chair with their feet, or their edge of their hips or the hip joint at the back edge of the chair, their feet on the floor.
Yep.
Right. And their hands on the pedal, perhaps, if I'm going to have them do that. And they may really be keeping their hips where they are, pull the abdominals up, and then just a slight extension there. So because the legs are down, you're really just focusing on the upper back muscles and a little bit of the erector spinae. You're not getting into that whole chain down through the glutes and the hamstrings. Oftentimes that whole chain is where things get tricky. So that allows me to just work a piece of it. And slowly get kind of just some upper back strength and some, erector spinae strength. And then we can work on the lower half too. So those are little places to play with in terms of getting low back happiness or back strength in a segmental way.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I want to move on a little bit toward, we have a few minutes left, next 5 minutes or so. Let's talk about lateral flexion.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't really discussed that. And I think it's very important because we do things like side planks and side crunch, side sit up, whatever you want to call it, those type of exercises, which are all great. But for some people, they may not be able to tolerate it because of the weight of their body is pretty heavy. And I see a lot of clients who have a few pounds to lose, let's just say. So that's a lot of weight. And especially if their arms aren't strong enough to really maintain a side plank, even on their knees, it can be very difficult without straining their lumbar spine or their hip. I've seen that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have to find other ways to begin to train the lateral flexion, at least in a safe environment, and then work toward some of our more difficult exercises.
So my typical lateral flexion starting point is tail wag in all fours, just to start the movement, the mobility piece. And then when I'm starting to work on the strength piece, my favorite tool is the Pilates arc, also known as a spine corrector or the small barrel in Pilates, where your hips are basically in the well and you've got an arc that your torso can lean over. And then you can use different parts of the rib cage to kind of push up, slowly getting into segmental strength through the torso. Most clients find that tolerable because they're fully supported underneath that side body. And I can take it like they can do just a partial sit up where they're kind of pushing their upper rib cage into the arc as they come up. And maybe their head is supported. Maybe their arm is down or their elbows on the arcs. They're actually getting some support from the bottom of the body. And then slowly build up how far they come up to get some strength going there. And I can even do from there, just like coming up to neutral and then going back down and coming up to neutral and going back down. Well, really the whole lower half of the torso is supported. So those are my favorite places to start to get some side body strength. And, one of the things about side body strength I find is with most of my clients anyway, certainly my low back clients, they will have strength on one side and literally nothing on the other.
Right. Yes.
Right. They'll do one side and they'll be able to do it and it'll be fine. They'll turn the other side. They'll look at me like, how do I do this? They just don't, it's not even in their awareness of how to lift up on that side. And that really tells me about, pretty radical side to side imbalance I need to work on.
Right. My favorite to initiate this is done with a tube, and it's done in the
Mm.
standing position. Can be done seated, but I
Mhm.
like it in the standing position. And I will anchor it 4 feet off the ground roughly. And I will have them start holding it with their
Oh.
hands on their
Mhm.
head,
Yep.
because now it's pulling me sideways. So again, I can start with a yellow band, something very light, or
Yep.
a red, and just have them stand there. And now they've got a little bit of pull. I'm just keeping them nice and tall. Then when they're ready, they can either take a half a step to the side. So now the band is going to be stretched a little bit more. I'm adding some motion. Even though their
Yep.
spine hasn't really changed that much, it has to adjust to the amount of pull. Or I can pull the band a little bit, or add a little bit of waviness to it. I can whack the band a little bit so that they're going to have a little bit of wobble, a little bit of wobble going on. Uh, and then I can have them extend their arms up, lengthening that lever,
Mhm.
and back down. I can then have them walk to the side. All of these variations are
Nice.
different progressions depending on how I want to load them. But again, it's a safe way to do it because I can watch their body. And if they can't maintain it, let go of the band. It's simple. They don't have
Right.
to hold it.
Right. Right.
So those are ways that I find are pretty easy to begin that lateral line and
Nice.
then move on from there.
And in the Pilates environment, if you had a tower or a trap table, I would probably use the long yellow leg spring
Yeah.
and do the same thing, right? Just have it pretty high up. So it's roughly a straight line across. It's not
Mhm.
really a big vector down or up, and hold it. And just, I mean, even just from there, taking a step side and step back, I'm picturing a
Yep.
few things, right?
Yep.
Or just light pull, or even going into it and then away from it, like all those things. That's great. I love it.
And one of a progression from there, and for those of you watching on YouTube, you can see me do this. I will start with my hand straight out in front of my chest. So I've got that rotation that wants to occur. So I'm resisting rotation and then take my arms up overhead, holding the band, and then
Uh-huh.
back down. So I'm going from that rotational to side flex.
Nice.
And it's really nice because that transition is something we don't think about that often.
Oh, we do a lot.
We do a lot.
And really, rotation and lateral flexion come together. They're
Yeah,
generally one way or another coupled movements. They don't usually happen in isolation. In fact, I don't
exactly.
think they can happen in isolation. Yeah.
So yeah, these are just a couple of progressions that we've decided to share with you today, uh, to hopefully engage your brain a little bit more
Yeah.
in a way that's going to get you, as this is, I mean, we've heard this, core off the floor. Let's get to, you want to get them to progress from those positions where they're just in supine. And guess what? These are ways that we can make those progressions and take a step forward. And I love your idea. Leave the variable to one variable at a time. Don't
Mhm.
throw too many things at them because you won't know what's working or what's not working.
Yeah.
So one variable, I love that. And, chart their progression, add a little bit here, add a little bit there. And then after about 6 weeks, when they've done a lot more, I'll draw their attention to it and say, hey, look at what you can do now that you couldn't
Yeah.
do just 6 weeks ago.
Yep.
Build their confidence up. They're like, oh, yeah. I was like, man, you couldn't have even come close to this 6 weeks ago or
Yep.
4 weeks ago, whatever it is. And they're like, yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And it gives them the confidence to make more progression and maybe to try something else.
Love it. Absolutely. Encourage, help them understand, because clients never recognize their progress.
No.
Or they really, or sometimes they do, but a lot of times they really don't. And for you to point it out is really important to build their confidence to, like, yes, this worked. You're going well. You're doing the right thing. Look at how much more you can do. You're so much more functional, right? Sometimes they'll give you that feedback, but a lot of times you got to push it.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, hopefully you guys learned a lot today. As always, do us a favor, hit that like and subscribe button. We really appreciate it. Check us out on Moving Convos on Instagram. If you have any questions, comments, or if you have some topic that you'd love to hear us speak on, or even a guest suggestion, hit us up, movingcombos@gmail.com. You can always check us out there. We respond, guarantee. If you send something to us, we will respond back. And thank you very much for joining us. We really do appreciate it. Each and every week, we are very grateful for every one of you who do listen. We really appreciate it. And for Nora St. John, I'm Brian Ritchie. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.